Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone. We'll start straight away because we're already running a little behind. I'd like to thank all of the journalists who are here today, who are taking part in this press conference, for coming. We've got here Senator Matteo Salvini, and we are here this morning to outline the priorities for the Lega. And bearing in mind the fact that the College of Commissioners was confirmed in Strasbourg last week, we're also going to comment on the programme that Commissioner van der Leyen, the Commission under van der Leyen wants to run for the next few years. So I'll pass the floor to Mr. Salvini now, and then you'll be able to ask your questions, please. I'd like to thank my colleagues very much for the first few months of their work. I'll be going back to Italy this afternoon, bearing in mind that there's quite a lot going on and there's a lot to be cleared up back at home on a lot of different topics. Now, when it comes to parliamentary activity for the League in Europe, we're working on various different fronts, particularly focusing on the budget and the financial framework, because there is unacceptable penalty, particularly for the agricultural and fisheries sectors in Italy. Speaking of agriculture, seeing that it's better to prevent rather than cure, we have to take any attack against Italian agriculture and the Mediterranean diet really very seriously. We're seeing now multinationals that want to take over and bring Red Bull, Coca-Cola and fries to Italy rather than having our parmesan and our local products. So I think that's something very important. I had a meeting with Technicalities today as well. We've got social dumping as well happening in certain sectors, such as goods transport, for example, logistics, transport on the roads, and differences in terms of the contracts that lorry drivers have. This obviously here is ruining working conditions for our workers. Then when it comes to migration, here again, this is somewhere we need to do work. Work needs to happen at national and European level. It seems that there are negotiations going on to opening the borders again to mass migration, something which isn't going to be good for Italy or Europe. So we are currently monitoring what's going on, looking at the pre-accession countries. Within the range of the multi-annual financial framework, we want to ensure that we can remove any funding going to countries like Turkey, for example. There's around €5 billion earmarked for Turkey, and for me that doesn't make any legal or economic sense, particularly if we take into account human rights and social rights, which are so important to the EU and something it's always talking about. Now, bearing in mind Italian debate and what's going on at home, we have been talking about the free trade agreement, about Mercosur, which will damage our production sectors, and the ESM as well. We're going to be in thousands of Italian squares across the country on Saturday and Sunday to protest against this. This is something which is a subject of a lot of public debate in Italy at the moment, and it's something that we need to be talking about. It seems that everybody is obsessed with this at the moment at home. It seems that some people want to benefit off the backs of others, and that's not something that we want to see happen. We want to have a European philosophy which is less focused on the market and more focused on social growth and individuals, looking at the people who live in Europe. In Flanders, we had 1,200 people from all over Belgium. We had colleagues from Austria and France as well at a convention there. And we had only 5 or 6 members last time now we've got 28 Lega members here, so it shows, I think, that everybody wants a Europe which is closer to the world of work, that's more interested in the social needs of men and women, and we want to continue to contaminate Europe with our own policies and our own ideas, showing that we're very happy where we are. Thank you very much. All right, if anybody's got any questions, I'd be quite happy to ask them. I know that there's not a lot of time though. Please go ahead.
Roberto Tallei, Sky TG24. Buongiorno, Senatore.
Good morning, Senator. On the ESM, now we take recourse to this when things go wrong, but I'm sorry, I haven't heard any concern about the Italian debt on the part of the League. It's even worse than expected sometime previously. On Turkey, you were talking about cutting European funding. That could have an impact in terms of further migration. What do you think about that?
Non possiamo vivere sotto.
We can't think about a country that doesn't respect civil rights and personal rights, so it's no good reason to spend more further billions of euros on that, on a country that doesn't care about the minimum standards, not only by the member states, but states close to Europe. So the invasion of millions of people seeking asylum, that's not a matter I'm considering. As to the public debt, I'm convinced, and I will continue to be convinced when I get back to government, that the only way to have an impact on the public debt is to reduce tax, reducing tax burden on Italian families, because anything else will only increase public debt. On the ESM, the debate's open. I'm not saying I'm right. We've got a position. What I don't accept is laughing or looking down on the Italian public who wanted to renegotiate and didn't want to sign. If you have to go to Parliament and you have to seek permission, and Parliament's permission wasn't sought in this case. Today, it's in all the newspapers. I'm happy that there is a debate in the country. Somebody lied. Either Conte or Gualtieri or the Italian government or the Eurogroup. Somebody lied. I don't know where. Someone in Rome or Brussels. But our position is that of the Five-Star Movement. The treaty isn't acceptable. It needs to be reviewed, rediscussed, redesigned and amended. And it's totally the opposite of what was said yesterday in Brussels, that it's all concluded. I think that the President is going to have a number of problems in the future, and I don't envy him.
Buongiorno, Bellavotti dell'agenzia di Anne Kronos. Due domande.
I've got a couple of questions, if I could please, Senator. The first, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember that the ESM reform was closed in the Eurogroup in June. So what I wanted to understand was why is this discussion happening so late? And then a second question, if I could, and I apologise for the question, but the ESM, as it is designed, has a kind of intergovernmental format. And it seems now that there's less power for the Commission and more power for the governments designed in it. So my question to you would be, what is it that you don't like about it? Because if there's more power for the governments and the governments are stronger, then surely that's a good thing. So I was just wondering how you resolve that contradiction and what you think the government should do. Well, our solution will work through the only democratically elected body here in Europe, which is the European Parliament. this is the democratic body that the other bodies should be referring to. This is where it should go through. It should go through the European Parliament, rather than the kind of pseudo-public bodies elsewhere. The European Parliament exists. It should have a mandate to go through the main decisions that are made here. It shouldn't be up to intergovernmental bodies or to the Commission. On the Eurogroup in June, the Parliamentary Act providing direction to the government didn't give a mandate to sign anything to anybody. And in reality, from last year, I'm not talking about 2019 now, but last year we had somebody come to Parliament, nothing came of that. No obligations were agreed upon. We didn't make any commitments. Now it seems people are talking about commitments, and I think there's something other than national interest here at play. The Council President, it seems now, ignoring the Minister for the Economy, is talking about stepping in. What we're doing is to ensure that we have a vote next week. We've not changed our position when it comes to this. We've had this position for 5 months now. That position hasn't changed. And in the Democratic Party, people haven't changed their opinion. Some people haven't changed their opinion in the last 5 months either, which is that nothing should be signed.
I'd like to find out more, if possible, about the ESM issue. I remember that in November last year, we journalists in Brussels talked about this, and in particular about the issue of the double majority to the single majority, the collective issue. And obviously this was pretty technical and nobody remembered that. Not even the political forces remembered. And then, no, it's true. Apart from experts like you, I should say that the result of the resolution presented in Rome at the Parliament on the 12th of June, if I remember rightly, is a work involving coordination by the League here and in Rome with the Senator Bagnai and Mr. Borg, who were responsible. And that dates back to November, when the single lib tax issue led to the light bulb coming on. It's also about a reform that we here as MEPs found it hard to understand what was going on from the Eurogroup and the Council from the end of 2018. So it's not true that nobody remembered about it, particularly about the technicalities, the single limb tax. We started working on the technicalities to come up with a position which was then expressed by the majority of the previous government against this reform for the reinsertion of these clauses that facilitate the restructuring of the debt. And we know that in the world of finance, just putting a possibility on the table could represent a risk. But then there's something that's fundamental, which is democratic procedure. We're talking about reforms of the Eurozone and how to improve it. But there's still the issue that from 2011, there is a body that is taking extremely decisions on the future, and access to documents is extremely difficult for MEPs as well as for all those who want to find out about the issue. So I did want to clarify that point.
Accetto volentieri il chiarimento.
Well, I accept that clarification. It's not that you didn't remember, Mr. Zanni, because you've always been very careful about this, and we know that, but public opinion in Italy, the public weren't really involved in this, perhaps because they were distracted or there was a lack of interest in technical issues on the part of the mainstream press. But that's just a preface, because my question is, now, in this situation, since there was a change, there's the question of automatic restructuring, and that was done away with. And that's what the Italian government is looking at. But there's still the question of that transition from the double clauses to the single majority clause. What exactly do you want to change or amend? Mr. Salvini was talking about amendments. What can be amended? What needs to be taken out of this agreement? I imagine that you're against this because there's a national ratification that's required. So if there is no amendment, I assume you're going to block it. We haven't changed our position with regard to the position 7 years ago. From our point of view, this can't be amended. We just need to block it. Full stop. When we talk about amendability, we'd like to echo what was said yesterday by Five Star about their doubts, not only about this, but about all kinds of other things, including the banking situation. We can't put everything in the same box. In our view, this is over now. It's closed. Full stop. There's no point amending it, and there's no point repeating this. So, does the ESM need to stay as it is? Well, we think that the ESM is pointless in terms of objectives. There's a central bank, the European Central Bank, that could easily better guarantee what should be guaranteed, which is the ESM. Financial stability, which is one of the objectives of the European Central Bank, and also in terms of the safeguarding and protection of deposits. That's another point in the package, as well as the backstop. The instrument used in the event of crisis. The ECB has the necessary instruments to do this. We don't want anything that's complicated or not transparent enough. But we want simple instruments that already exist, that have all of the necessary power. The sovereign debt crisis experienced by the Eurozone since 2010 hasn't been resolved because we've made a few funds available and the ESM. It was resolved because Mr. Draghi said whatever it takes. So this shows us that there is an instrument that exists. It's easier to use. Also in terms of objectives that could be in line with what is set out in the ESM. So we think that the ESM is useless. It's pointless, in particular for Italians, because there's all the money that we've already invested, all of the loans, and then the money that we commit to contributing, and that could be used in a better way. Therefore, in the event of another systemic crisis, the ESM will not help prevent or reduce the effects of such a crisis, particularly when we're talking about potential crises in the financial and banking system. And obviously that can't come from Italy, but rather it would come from other countries which are probably better than we are at hiding their problems.
Buongiorno, sono Donato Bendicenti della RAI. Lei...
Thank you. Mr. Salvini, at the beginning of your speech, you spoke about some priorities, legislative and political priorities for the Lega in Europe, and you mentioned the budget. Now, in the multi-annual budget, there are funds 21% of the total is going to the new Green Deal. I was wondering if you're happy with that. And then another question which came to mind listening to Mr. Zanni when you were talking about whatever it takes, said by Mr. Draghi. Now, Mr. Draghi has got a profile, I think, which covers a lot of different areas.
Il destino altrui.
Well, I wouldn't want to talk about Mr. Draghi and where he should go. I think he's got self-determination when it comes to his job. On the President of the Republic, I would say, why not? I wouldn't have anything against it, but it's not up to me to say where I think Mr. Draghi should end up. Now, the government is holding millions of Italian citizens hostage at the moment. We have to look at Italy's presence here in Brussels. We've got a weak government with infighting, and we have to question, I think, the general direction that it's taking the country in. Looking at the multi-annual financial plans of that government, I think it shows this situation that Italy finds itself in at the minute. Now, on the new Green Deal, that is a way, I think, to help certain people but weaken the position of others. Now, when we talked about greening in the CAP, it all sounded lovely, but actually it was penalising farmers and the agricultural world. Benefiting the usual countries and ensuring that certain countries could improve their industry. And if we can green industry in certain countries, then I think that's all very well and good, but we have to ensure we know exactly what's behind this. We'll have to see what happens when we get the proposal from the Commissioner, more specifically. Once we've got that package, then we'll be able to have a little bit more information and know what's going on.
Anche perché la sala era fino alle 11.
I'm afraid the room was booked until 11. So, first about what you were saying about the strength of Italy and Europe and the position of the League. Yesterday evening, your party was confirmed, and I wonder about the influence of the 28 representatives representing the Italians. From that point of view, do you think that's the right choice? Then, as to the ESM, opposition to the signature of the treaty or the agreement, whatever you're talking about, do you think we need a different government? Well, we're not thinking about a new invented government, but after this government there are going to be elections. I think that Mr. Conte talked about his former senators. There were over 60 MPs missing yesterday evening, so I think that speaks for itself. As to the European position of the League, I have no doubt we're talking to everybody about the individual dossiers. We're happy to talk to the EPP, to the Conservatives, to the commissioners, to the Polish Commissioner for Agriculture. Now, one thing is having a good relationship and talking to people, but another is to go against our identity. And obviously, you're talking about a health cordon. I don't think that's a good idea. This is a Soviet idea. There are all kinds of Europeans who voted. Then there are people who are being isolated from a health point of view. This cordon sanitaire, look in Venezuela, look at the situation there, in China, or the former USSR. Now, talking about a cordon or a bloc, a health bloc, with regard to freely elected MPs just represents hate and arrogance, and it's embarrassing. I'd be extremely embarrassed if anybody talked about a cordon or a bloc from my group. Anybody who speaks like that should be reprimanded.
It's not a political meeting. This is not a political meeting. This is a press room. You don't clap here.
No,
you can take your clap elsewhere, not here.
Chi è che ha urlato come un ossesso? Io.
Mr. Salvini.
Nazionale.
Arrestateci. Abbiamo applaudito, arrestateci.
No, ci sono delle regole, se non ne sapete.
There are rules. If you can't respect the rules, what can you do?
Delinquenti.